this is my daughter Izzy.
Hi.
And today we are going to be making a couple of recipes that hopefully you can follow along and make at home. And now that summer is in full swing, you probably want to get back to some socializing. And so what we're making today are two dishes that are very simple and easy to make in probably an hour if you include bake time and whatnot. And will really welcome and wow your friends when they come over to have a little chit chat. It's been a long time since we've all been able to socialize. So we are going to be making a potato and leek soup, which we will then garnish with a variety of different things, depending on if you're serving it hot or cold. Additionally, I'm going to be showing you how to make buttermilk biscuits. And both of these recipes are from my grandmother's cookbooks. She was a phenomenal cook. She was cooking about the same time Julia Childs was, and she used to be actually on the local public access television. And she wrote 3 cookbooks, and I will show you one of them. And they are called Favorite Recipes from the Diary of a New England Cook by Corinne Morse. And she wrote the date and an actual diary entry about what she was doing, which often included us, her grandchildren. And my cousin did all these really cute little illustrations. So I'm going to be reading one of those journal entries for you before I make the potato leek soup. It's always fun for us. She passed away a long time ago, but that's how we remember her, right? We call her Mimi, so this is in memory of Mimi. So the first recipe we're going to make is buttermilk biscuits, because we want them to be cooking in the oven while we're making our potato leek soup. So I'm just going to read the entry from Mimi. This was Saturday, February 26th. So she used to make buttermilk biscuits in the winter time because it's such a hearty, delicious meal to have at breakfast when it's snowing out and cold. It is also a great recipe for the summer and will go very well with our soup, and one of our favorites. So she wrote, "Such a beautiful day. Even the birds seem to know that spring is in the air." February 26th? I don't know. "The trees between my house and Ruth's were filled with birds when I went for a walk this noon. I walked down the road to listen to the river as the water splashed against the rocks that line the shore. I know that winter is still here, but the prospect of spring makes me happy. This next recipe is very old. It belongs to my friend Muriel's grandmother, who spent her early years on the prairie in Saskatchewan, Canada." So the first thing we're going to do is put the butter into our flour.
Does it matter what temperature?
That's a good question. It does matter what temperature. You want the butter to be pretty cold, so you take it right out of the fridge and work it in. And the whole idea is that the butter is relatively chilled when you put it into the oven, and it helps make the biscuits rise and get very flaky. If, for example, you poured melted butter in there, it would not help the biscuits rise at all. So I've already cut the butter. We'll just add it in here. Now, the way you cut butter is that you literally take your 2 knives and you're trying to get the butter cut up into little teeny tiny chunks, just like this, and it works it right into the flour. And the reason you don't just stick this in your Cuisinart is because your butter would be so cut up and it would just get really gummy and gooey. And then again, you lose the ability of the butter to work its magic on these biscuits by making them really flaky.
Is it okay if they're small chunks?
Yes, it should be very small chunks though. There you go, give it a shot. Mimi cut everything that had flour and butter. Mimi cut just like that. So even pie crust, anything that had to be flaky, and she made the best, and nobody seems to be able to replicate her ability to make flaky pastries. You can just go zing, zing, zing. It'll work its way in. Yep, that's right. As long as your knives are touching each other, that's the key. You want the butter to be sort of pea-sized, I guess, in the end. So if you think you have a big chunk like this, too big, needs a little more cutting. What do you think? Pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm gonna add the half teaspoon salt. This is salt, and I don't really measure a lot of things. That's about a half teaspoon to me, but salt brings out the flavor of things. And I noticed that Mimi sometimes was a little light on the salt, so I just add a little more. And this is our baking soda and baking powder that I've already measured out. We're gonna add that. You can mix it right in. Okay, so the next thing that's on the recipe is 1/3 of a cup of buttermilk. And if you are like me, you don't make very many recipes that call for buttermilk. So you don't really want to go out and buy a whole thing of buttermilk just for it to sit in your refrigerator, although you could make pancakes and waffles and a few other things. And often you find you want to make something with buttermilk, but you don't have buttermilk. So there are a variety of things you can do. One of them is you can take regular milk and add a little bit of yogurt to it and some vinegar. I prefer vinegar that doesn't have color to it, because if you use like a balsamic vinegar, it has a strong taste and it makes whatever you're making sort of a brownish tint. So I used apple cider vinegar. We don't drink very much milk, so I didn't have milk, so I used almond milk, and then I added a little bit of plain yogurt. And you get a consistency, it's kind of thick, and it's vinegary, and it's gonna bring a really interesting flavor to the biscuits. And that is basically the recipe. However, I am going to experiment today by adding some grated cheese. You could do Parmesan. This is a 5 cheese blend that you can buy in large quantities from BJ's or Costco or wherever. And so I thought, yeah, let's add a little bit of cheese, because cheese really goes well with potatoes, right? So we'll add some cheese. How much should we add? You tell me when.
That's probably good.
Is that good? Okay. That was probably a 1/2 cup. And now we're going to add our buttermilk. And usually at this stage, you can put your knives down and pull out your large fork and sort of mix it in. You could also add a little bit of chives in here, or if you like it very garlicky, you could chop up some garlic. Whatever you add, remember that keep your guests in mind. I wouldn't add garlic if you don't know if they like garlic or not. Some people don't like it too much. And so you're basically going to be stirring this around until it gets to a consistency that you can kind of pick up with your hand. You can see that it's very flaky right now. It's just because it hasn't been incorporated quite yet. And eventually I am going to get my hands in there, and I make sure you wash them with soap. And then we are going to roll it out on a little bit of floured surface. All right, I will show you how to get your hands in there so that it all sort of comes together in a ball, but at the same time, you don't want to melt the butter. So you don't want to work it too much, and that is the key with pastry, all pastries. You're making any kind of pastry dough, pie crust. If you work it too much, it gets tough. It has to be enough to stick together when you roll it out, though. That's why you measure the flour and the liquid when you're doing pastries. If you don't measure, you'll end up having it too flaky, or it'll be like a hard rock. All right. Get that to kind of stick together. Now we're going to roll it out. So now we'll roll out our dough. The key with this dough is that you want to be able to handle it. It shouldn't be too gooey, but it also shouldn't be crumbling and falling apart. When I take my rolling pin, I ought to be able to sort of roll it without a lot of flour. See, the rolling pin comes right up like that. And I see a lot of flakes in there, and that's going to be really delicious when it comes time to serve it. And this recipe doesn't make a lot of biscuits, but the biscuits are pretty hearty. You really only need 1 or 2 maybe if you're going to be working outside in the middle of winter. You have a lot of chores to do, like horse mucking or watering. So for us though, we're just having a little lunch and a chit chat, so probably 1 muffin, 1 biscuit is enough. So we roll it about like that. That's maybe, I don't know, 1/2 inch thick. And then you take your ball jar or any cup that you want. You get a little bit of flour on it if it will stick. And this is how you're going to shape them. You just spin it a little bit, pop it out, and there you have a biscuit. We're gonna let these rise for a few minutes so they will come up, and then in the oven they come up a lot. So I'm not gonna grease the cookie sheet. Normally we would, but in this case we don't. There's a little bit of flour on the bottom of these, and you wanna brush it off, but you leave just enough so that when you place it on the cookie sheet, it's not going to stick, okay? And the key to these is that they're double deckers. So you have 1 there. Push this guy off again quite a bit. And then you put another one right on top of it. And when they come out of the oven, they'll have risen quite a bit. And it's really yummy to break them open and put butter and jam or honey on them. It's delicious. So do you want to be in charge of that? Sure. Go for it. Now you have a dilemma, which is that you have extra, and that's good. We're going to use this, but before we use it, we do want to try and get some of that flour off, or it just gets a little too flaky and it's hard to manage. So let's try and get that. And then you can go ahead and sort of knead it together, and when you think it's sticking, you can roll it out again, and we'll get another muffin or 2. Biscuit. Excellent. So we'll let those rise for about 10 more minutes. You can see already they're starting to rise, and so that's good. And then they'll continue to do that in the oven. In about 10 minutes, we'll stick them in, and in the meantime, we will make our soup. And the first rule in the kitchen when I went to the French Culinary Institute was that your knives had to be sharp. So this is part of my kit that I had when I went to school there. And before we did everything, before we chopped any vegetables, any set of vegetables, we would sharpen. And the way you sharpen is you hold on to your sharpener, and what you're trying to do is just go down on one blade and back on the other. And sometimes when people do this, they're afraid they're gonna come back and stab themselves. I've never seen that happen. Don't be scared. So Izzy, I'm even gonna let you do it. So you go relatively fast, but you only go at the speed that you feel comfortable with. And you'll be amazed that you go from a very dull knife to a very sharp knife when this is over. The reason you need a sharp knife is not just for its convenience, but because if you have a very dull knife and then you wipe the blade and you go to cut something and it is dull, it will jump and then it will cut your finger, which slices very easily, I found, much more easily than a vegetable does. So I'm gonna let you do the big knife in a second. The potatoes for this recipe must be peeled, and after you peel a potato, you need to keep it in water or it will oxidize and turn discolored. these potatoes do not need to be a uniform size because we're going to be pureeing them. But they should be small because you want them to cook about at the same speed as your onion and your leeks. So these will sweat a little bit. We'll add the potatoes, some white wine, some water, some salt, and we're gonna let them simmer for a little while to get nice and mushy so that we can use our immersion blender. When you peel a potato, you hold it like this, and you put your thumb on one end and your hand and the blade on the other, and you'd want to take off as little of the skin as possible. I've seen some people try to use a peeler when they peel potatoes or other kind of vegetables, and that's a bad idea because a peeler is very sharp, and if you were going like this with a peeler on a small vegetable, you tend to catch your thumb. And I've seen some very bad accidents with that. So now we're going to peel the potato. And for this recipe, you want to be sure that your potatoes are peeled. This is not a recipe that would like to have peels in it because we're going to puree it and we want it to be very smooth when we eat it. And so I have many potatoes chopped up here, 8 potatoes. They don't have to be a uniform size because again, we're going to puree them. You want to make sure that you store them in water while you're waiting to cook them because otherwise they will turn brown. And here you can see I have already chopped some leeks and 1 onion in that bowl. So I have peeled the potato, and now I always use my chef knife when I go to cut something. So I'm going to let you try and sharpen this. Again, you go back and forth. You want to give that a try?
So
You can go slowly, you don't have to do, yep, just like that, and then you turn it. Good. And you want to make sure you're actually on the blade itself. Yeah, that's right. Good. Okay, and then you can wipe it, because if there are any shards of, I don't know, steel, I guess, whatever, you want to make sure you get that off. Good. Okay, guys, so the key to slicing up anything is not to chop your fingers while you're doing it. So with potatoes, the easiest thing to cut it in half and then work with it on its flat side. Now, when you cut a potato, this is the French way of doing it. Your thumb should be underneath your fingers, and it's really your knuckles that are guiding the blade. So I'm going to cut it one more time like this. Okay, so my thumb is under here because your thumb can get in the way, and you always want to know where your thumb is. It's always hidden and protected. Your blade is right up against your fingers, and your fingernails, the very bottom of your fingers, are tucked in so that your blade is really kind of hitting your knuckles. And so it looks like this. And I am not as fast as the experts, of course, but the whole idea is that you could be looking at someone and talking and cutting, and you wouldn't have a problem, okay? And your fingers, they just move along. All right, good? So since we're not using them quite yet, we're gonna stick those in there, and we are gonna work on our leek. So this is a leek. We don't grow these in our garden, generally speaking. And leeks can get very dirty and sandy. Stepping around the dog right at my feet. So you want to make sure that you clean them properly. You snip off the end there, which you'll compost, and then you'll choose right to about there, I guess. I'm guessing. That is the best part of the leek. Once it starts to get really dark, I might have been able to go up a little bit further, but you don't want to use parts of the leek that are going to be tough. And those can be used for other recipes. We'll talk about that another day. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice the leek right down the center. Okay? So there's our leek. It's beautiful. And we are literally going to be washing every single leaf because you can see the dirt that gets into a leek. And there's nothing worse than biting into potato leek soup and crunching on some sand. So I'm going to go over to the sink now and wash every single piece here, but I'm going to keep it intact so that when I come back, I can turn it over and slice it, okay? And sometimes when you do that, you get a little bit of dirt on your cutting board. So I always wash the cutting board before I start chopping the leeks again. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to be slicing our leeks, and we want them to be about this wide. And you can take a crack at the second one if you want. Again, I'm gonna shield my hand from a bouncing knife, like so. And it feels like it's starting to get too thick. Like this one's too thick. That's gonna be hard to puree. This guy too. I'm gonna get rid of them. We don't want any tough pieces in our soup. All right, so now Izzy, I'm gonna let you give a shot. Get those out of the way. Even this one, I don't know. Yeah, it looks pretty tender on the bottom. You wanna give that a shot?
Okay, so like this.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and really the knife's supposed to be touching your fingers, but do your best. It doesn't have to be perfect, and go slowly if you want. It takes a long time to get that habit down. Bring this over. I've already done my onion in there. And we'll put it in the frying pan. So I have this very deep frying pan, and it has, you know, these tall sides, and that's important because I'm going to be putting my immersion blender in here and blending. And if your frying pan is too shallow, oops, you want to, just gonna wipe that, you want to, you'll have a problem with it. It will come up the sides. You don't want that to happen. You also can do this in like a soup, you know, a soup pan. But we decided to do it in here because it makes for better filming. So you can go ahead and add those, Izzy. And we don't really want to brown them, we're just going to sweat them, so I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit once they've gotten brown. I'm going to stir them quite a bit, so keep stirring them. So while Izzy is stirring up the leeks that are sweating, she's going to add a few pinches of salt and a little bit of butter. And you can go ahead and do that a few pinches of salt and some butter from the butter thing. And if you need to turn it down, go ahead. This is a garlic scape. And so we grow our own garlic because it's absolutely delicious, and we get these huge bulbs. You plant them in the fall and forget about them completely. And then miraculously in the spring, before you've even thought about turning your garden, you have these little green sprouts that just make you very happy. And they turn into these long leaves that come up, and every plant gets one scape. This one is a little young. Normally I'd let it grow a little bit more and it would start to curl. But just in the interest of adding it to today's soup, I decided to pick a few. They taste a little bit like a scallion, I guess. Not very garlicky, but like a hint of garlic in them. And so again, I'm just gonna chop them really small. You could even use this as a garnish. Now, if this were a garnish, you'd wanna have really small pieces, like that. But I feel that the flavor when these are raw, the flavor is a little bit overpowering for your guests, and they just do better being sauteed with the leeks to add a little garlic flavor to it. Or you could even add some garlic if you want. So I'm just gonna do 2 of those. And they look so pretty if you have a nice blue ball jar. They look so pretty on the table. These you can find at Whole Foods, you can find them at Idlewild, you can find them sometimes at local growers. They are kind of expensive, and so I recommend you grow your own. But the great thing about these is that you can freeze them and have them all year long. And so in the middle of winter, when you've decided you're gonna make a stew, you can add some garlic scapes and it will remind you of the beautiful summer that you've left behind, but is going to eventually be on its way. So here they are. I'm going to add them, and then I'm going to add our potatoes and get them started. So here we go. We're going to add our potatoes. And now is the time to add your white wine. And the reason you want to add your white wine before adding any other liquid is because the alcohol needs some time to burn off. And it takes about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes for the alcohol to burn off. If the alcohol hasn't burned off, the wine tends to taste a little bit bitter. So this is a bottle that we had the other night. I always save a little bit at the end because I know I'm going to be cooking with it the next day. Just add it in there, and we'll put this on high heat and really let it simmer. And when it's done simmering, we're going to add a little bit of water to help cook these potatoes. This guy's a little large. That's okay. We'll let that simmer. Yes. So there they are. They've started to rise, and they're not done until they've browned on the top. If you take them out too early, they might be a little doughy on the inside. Nobody likes a doughy biscuit. You can smell the alcohol burning off. Do you smell it? Mm-hmm. It's almost bitter.
Really good.
Yeah. So now I'm going to add about, I don't know how many ounces that is, 1.5 cups of water. Give it a nice stir, and then we're going to put the top on and let it simmer for a little while. And the key when cooking potatoes is to make sure you have enough salt. So did you just give a pinch, Liz?
I gave 3 pinches.
3 pinches. I'm probably going to give it just a little more because the potatoes really absorb it. And you don't want to have to season your soup. You want it to be seasoned before you serve it. Very good. Okay, so the biscuits are just about done. I can see that they have started to brown on the top. It's browning right here. You don't want them to get too brown. And they've risen and they've started to fall over a little bit. And that's just what you want. Izzy, if you want to put that on our table. As you can see, we've set a nice cozy corner to have a little chat with our friend who we haven't seen in a while. We'll sit elbow to elbow and have a little gossip. So, if you're serving ice water, I highly recommend that you add some mint to it. It adds a nice flavor. It is also a beautiful color and will look really pretty on your table. So I grow my own mint, and I like to keep some in water, and I have to replace it every couple of days because it does spoil rather quickly. But we have a big garden of mint outside and try to use it for all kinds of things. So you just break off a sprig and stuff it down in there. If you really want it to taste very minty, you could infuse your water with mint by having a big pitcher of mint and putting all the mint at the bottom first and then adding your water and ice, and that will infuse it with a nice flavor. Now your guests, if they find that drinking this is the mint's getting in their way, they can just take it out and put it on the side of their plate. But it's gonna look so pretty right here among all of our goodies. Does that look nice? Yeah. Okay, so now we are going to puree our soup, And after it has been pureed, I'm going to add in the half and half. And the recipe calls for milk, but I like to use half and half because I really like the creamy flavor of it. If you do not have an immersion blender, I highly recommend it. If you want to add something to your kitchen, this is great because you can stick it in deep crocks of soup or stock. I use it when I make jellies and jams because I like to puree some of the ingredients in there. And I find it's a lot easier than, especially if you're dealing with something hot, if you're trying to pour it into your Cuisinart, sometimes you might spill on yourself, or if you have to wait for it to cool. But you can use a blender, you can use any other means that you have for blending your soup. This is my favorite. All right, so you'll know it's time to blend when your potatoes are nice and soft. And usually you test the softness of a potato by sticking a knife or a fork into it. And if it goes right through, then it's ready. It's nice and soft. So I think these are ready. And you can see that I didn't brown any of this. It's important for this dish that everything stay this color. We're gonna add some variation in color at the end when we add our croutons or our bacon bits. So, how do you puree? You just stick it in there and turn it on. Now you can serve this with a few little chunky pieces, that's fine. That's how I like to serve pretty much everything. It just adds a little bit more texture to your food, and that's what I like. All right, so now we've added our half and half, or our milk. I'm just gonna add the last little bit in there. Beautiful. So now if you're serving this warm, as I am today, you might want to put it on simmer and just let it simmer for a little bit. If while you're stirring it, you found chunks of potato that you don't like that, you can always put your immersion blender back in and give it a little more blend. I'm gonna leave it. I like little chunks of things. And now is a good time to taste it. While it's nice and warm, just take a little bit out with your spoon. Don't burn yourself. You want to see if there's enough salt. Oh, that is so delicious. Needs a little bit more. I like to really bring out the flavor with salt. And my grandmother added paprika. Just sprinkled it over the top. But we're going to be adding bacon bits, so I'm not going to add any paprika. But it does give it a nice color, nice red color to it. So once that's finished, it's really pretty to put it into a nice bowl rather than serving it from your kitchen stove, and then your guests can help themselves to seconds or to thirds, as you know they're going to, because your soup is so delicious. So you very gently, carefully, don't want to get burned, ladle it into your soup bowl, and you fill it up little more than 3/4 of the way. Can hear the dog, she's moaning because she thinks it smells so good. She's hoping she's gonna get some. Isn't that pretty? And now we'll put it on our table. All right, so there's our soup. Doesn't that look delicious? Mm-hmm. Do you wanna help yourself to a biscuit? So as you can see, I brought out some old china that we have, and I love serving soup in these delicate teacups because I just think it makes for a really very special, lighthearted meal. You don't want to have a huge bowl of soup. We're just having a little bit of something to sip on as we have our little chit chat about what's been going on in the world. We don't talk politics, of course. That would be bad manners. Well, Izzy and I do, that's for sure. There you go. And then a great garnish for the top of something like this would be bacon bits, if you want. I like a few. Izzy, would you like some?
No, thank you.
No, I'm gonna put a few on here. Izzy's a vegetarian. Maybe a few little croutons. And I only put croutons on if it is hot soup, because the hot soup will sink into these hard croutons. Would you like a few?
Yes, please.
And they're seasoned. You can make your own. Just slice up some bread with butter and garlic and olive oil. Fry it all up, and you can put it in the oven to harden. If you serve it with cold soup, sometimes these are kind of hard to eat. The cold soup doesn't really penetrate. All right, now, the way you eat a biscuit, you open it up. Doesn't that look beautiful? We have the cheese inside, a nice heaping helping of butter. We like butter in our family. It's gonna melt there. And then I'm going to have mine with my homemade strawberry rhubarb jam, which the Flower Club is familiar with in Harvard because I gifted them that last year. And there you go. That is a beautiful brunch or light lunch to have with a friend. And while we get started, I'm going to read and end with this last recipe for the potato leek soup. I'm going to end today with the second entry for the potato leek soup that's from my grandmother Mimi, your great-grandmother. Wednesday, October 30th. The hot summer weather has not left us completely. This morning was cold, but by noon the sun was hot. When I came home from school, children were out playing in summer sunsuits. My grandchildren were down by the river fishing in the shallow stream, all that remains of our usual deep water. The last of the potatoes have been dug today and are in large baskets waiting to be stored for the winter. They are crisp and white. I peeled 8 to make a hearty soup for supper. There you go. Cheers, Iz.
Cheers.
Thank you for your help today. Little memory of Mimi. Bon appetit. Dig in. What do you think?
That's very good.
Delicious. I love the way the warm soup has infused into the croutons. It has a little bit of crunch and really nice salty, garlicky flavor to it. It's absolutely delicious. Yum. I have to try my biscuit. See if you think the cheese worked on this. What do you think?
It works really well.
Delicious. Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
Well, Izzy and I hope you have enjoyed cooking with us today. It was fun, wasn't it? You can do it too in your own kitchen, even if you've never tried these recipes before. So enjoy, and thanks for joining us.